Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar on buzzing biodiversity, exploring North America's native bees to honor World Bee Day with the Xerces Society's Invertebrate Conservation Ambassador, April LeBaron. My name is Laura Coates, and I'm an AmeriCorps member serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping rules to go over. Those of you watching online have your cameras off and are muted throughout the presentation. Please type any questions you have in the chat or the Q&A section, and we will answer those at some point during the presentation. We will have a very brief survey following the presentation that should only take less than a minute to complete. The survey helps support programming like this one, so we appreciate you taking the time to fill those out. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube at a later date in case anyone missed anything or wants to watch it later. One more announcement before we get started is that there is a Planting for Pollinators webinar with Bob Henriksen from the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum taking place after this webinar at 6:30 for those interested in joining. Without further ado, let's get started. Tonight we welcome the Xerces Society's Invertebrate Conservation Ambassador, April LeBaron. April, I will let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you, Laura, for that introduction. I am April LeBaron. I grew up in Colorado doing a lot of camping and spending a lot of time outside. So I have always been very interested in the nature around us, and being outside a lot, I got to spend a lot of time with insects. So that led me to volunteering with the Xerces Society. And so currently I am an ambassador representing these tiny insects that help run our world. So today we are celebrating World Bee Day. It was started in Slovenia, which is known for its rich beekeeping heritage, and so they spearheaded the initiative to have World Bee Day recognized by the United Nations. And they decided to have it on May 20th because they wanted to celebrate Anton Jansa. So he was a big Slovenian beekeeper, and he is the founder of modern beekeeping. So he changed the size and the shape of hives so they can be more easily stacked together to make it easier to move hives from one pasture to another. And then this is one of the main reasons that beekeeping occurs worldwide today. So Slovenia is in the native range of bee species commonly used for honey, which is Apis mellifera. This map shows where beekeeping for honey has happened successfully practically everywhere except Antarctica. The colors help distinguish the countries that fall in the native range of Apis mellifera. I do want to state that some of these countries, like China, have a divide where some cities and towns fall in the native range and some of them are part of the exotic range. So all countries in pink had some portion of the country in the native range, but if you were to change the mapping to highlight, say, the native range within cities and towns, most places in China, including the capital, Beijing, would be green because Apis mellifera is considered exotic in these places. So my version of the map includes countries like Greenland, where human-managed colonies have existed. Greenland is unhighlighted on the map that I picked this up from because the original map that shows where wild colonies exist and bees have been kept by honeybee keepers in Greenland, but they have not established wild bee colonies. So the original map was used to delineate the native range of Apis mellifera to emphasize the importance of conserving wild bee populations in their natural habitats in order to maintain their genetic diversity and ecological functions. So this brings up the analogy to save a songbird, you wouldn't keep chickens. So honeybees are a form of livestock. There are a lot of reasons for honeybee keeping, like creating that delicious honey that we all love to eat, but bee conservation is not one of the reasons to be honeybee keeping. So this analogy brings us back to the wonderful organization that I volunteer for, the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. was named after the now extinct Xerces blue. So Xerces blue butterfly was the first U.S. butterfly to go extinct due to human activities. Since 1971, the Xerces Society has worked to protect wildlife through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitat. To protect the life that sustains us, we are involved in conservation efforts. One way is by supplying communities with habitat kits that contain species native to their region. We also work on advocacy, especially by working on policy. Most recently, the Xerces Society is opposing the proposal to remove the definition of harm from the Endangered Species Act because it would put endangered species at risk of rapid extinction. You can read more about this on the Xerces website and sign the letter there. We protect the life that sustains us by getting involved in research projects at multiple institutions. Xerces works with specialized researchers to learn about the needs of invertebrates that we support. And lastly, we have many volunteers and employees that participate in events like this to teach as many people as we can about beautiful and beneficial invertebrates. We cannot do any of this without the help of our many amazing partners. I'm going to take a sip of water while you take the time to read about some of our partners. So Xerces is supported by an amazing community of members who make it our work possible. For any members watching today, I want to say thank you. If you are not a member yet, you can go to xerces.org/donate to learn about our membership. If you're not a person like me who jumps into random research holes, you probably have not asked or answered this question yet. Why should I care about pollinators? It might help if you understand pollination a bit better. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the stamen of a flower to the pistil. Flowers rely on wind, water, insects, birds, and bats to transport their pollen from one flower to another. 85% of flowering plants require a pollinator to fertilize the flower. Animal pollinators come in many shapes and sizes, but they all help plants reproduce. And this is not only good for plants, but it is a huge benefit for us too. We can thank animal pollinators for 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food and drink that we consume. According to a May 2013 report by the United States Department of Agriculture, animal pollination contributes between $20 to $30 billion in economic value to U.S. agriculture each year. This is a picture of a Whole Foods market in their produce section. A few years ago, they wanted to show customers what would happen if we didn't have pollinators. So Whole Foods staff took out 237 of the 453 products, a total of 52% of the produce items normally sold at the store. Removed items include apples, avocados, eggplants, and squash, and these all come from pollinators, so this is a powerful imagery of what grocery shopping would look like without pollinators. The next year, Whole Foods looked at the impact to dairy. Dairy is affected because cows feed on things like alfalfa, which requires pollination. And this is the dairy aisle without pollinators. So pollinators not only fulfill our needs, they contribute to our pleasures. They allow us to see beautiful springtime flowers. One of my favorite childhood memories was picking strawberries and visiting my grandma in California, and I can thank pollinators for that memory. We can all thank pollinators for the carved pumpkins seen on porches all October and the delicious pumpkin pie we consume in November. Pollinators not only support flowers and us, they support other wildlife too. For example, many species of fish rely on insects for food. Fruits and seeds make up the majority of many birds' diets, and those fruits and seeds cannot be produced without pollination. Roughly 96% of terrestrial birds in North America rear their young on insects or other arthropods. A species that can be seen here in Nebraska, the black-capped chickadee, eats a lot of seeds and are regular visitors of backyard feeders as an adult. So this is probably a species that you've seen before. However, insects are the primary food for rearing its young. The parents can collect 10,000 caterpillars to raise the young. In the summer, grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park eat up to 40,000 Miller moths a day. A single moth has a high enough fat content that it accounts for as much as half a calorie. This means that 20,000 calories of just moths per day can be consumed by a grizzly bear. Now let's learn about the bees that you all came here to learn about. So bees are the most important group of pollinators. With the exception of a few species of wasps and beetles, only bees deliberately carry pollen to bring back to their nest for their offspring. Generally, pollen-feeding wasps and beetle species are predators for part of their lifespan, while bees are herbivores that rely on flowers for their entire lifespan. Bees also exhibit a behavior called flower constancy, so this means that they repeatedly visit one particular plant species on any given foraging trip. So this enhances pollination efficiency by minimizing the transfer of pollen from one species to another species that's unrelated. It increases the likelihood of fertilization that and that leads to the development of viable seeds. Since bees stay close to the nest, they cover many flowers in the same area thoroughly before moving on. Plants growing near each other get more consistent and complete pollination, which helps with higher fruit and seed production, while other pollinators, like the monarch butterfly, they roam more widely and may visit fewer flowers in one patch, leaving many plants unpollinated. In addition to these behaviors, bees transport pollen in two different ways that help them transfer more pollen for the plants and for their babies. Some bees, like the bumblebee, transports moist pollen in a pollen basket on their rear leg. This pollen basket is called the corpicula by scientists. Other bees will carry dry pollen in the scopa that is on their rear legs, on the underside of their abdomen, or on the underside of their thorax. Scopa is the scientific term for a pollen brush, and these pollen brushes can come in many sizes and shapes. Some bees have brushes that are dense and have split ends that hold extra pollen, while some bees barely have any scopa. We already talked about honeybees being not native to North America. Another distinguishing feature about them is that honeybees are social and live in large colonies. They are not like most of our native bees. Almost all of our native bees, with a few exceptions, are solitary species. Additionally, only honeybees create an excess of honey. Bumblebees, one of the social exceptions, produce just enough honey to keep the colony alive, plus a little bit extra for a rainy day. While honeybees are important agricultural species, we are going to focus on native bees, the ones that are native to our range. If you do already love honeybees and you are in luck with helping native bees, you are also helping honeybees. Since solitary native bees are not protecting a nest or a stash of honey like those honeybees or those bumblebees. They don't typically sting unless they are provoked. Social bees, like honeybees, are more likely to sting in defense of their nest mates, while solitary bees are more likely to run away and hide to ensure their survival. Worldwide, there are an estimated 20,000 species of bees, with approximately 3,600 species native to North America, and here in Nebraska, there are about 400 species. There's not been extensive research on native bees here in Nebraska, but we can make these assumptions based on the distribution patterns of bees, and this is what makes citizen science important. Anyone can submit their insect photos, and if they show some of the correct features on those photos, an insect specialist and entomologist can identify the species and add to our understanding about that species and its distribution. With continued research, we can learn that there are with continued research, we may learn that there are way more than 400 species. Our neighbor, Colorado, has more than 900 bee species. And by taking photos of bees in your garden, you might help us increase our bee diversity score so we can get up there like Colorado. The morphological diversity of bees is astonishing. Bee species can be so different. Here we have the largest and smallest bee species in North America. The largest is a carpenter bee species that can be up to 1.25 inches long, and the smallest bee, commonly known as a fairy bee, is less than 0.08 inches long. These species can both be found in western United States, like in California. Additionally, bees come in a range of colors from dull black to bright metallic green or blue. They have markings in red, orange, white, black, brown, and yellow. Some bees don't even look like bees. They can be tiny, not very fuzzy, and not yellow and not black. Well, this one is a little bit black, but not black and yellow. A bee has 5 eyes. Two large compound eyes are used for vision, much like our own 2 eyes. They can see most of the light spectrum that we can see, plus some additional UV colors, but some species have a harder time seeing red. On top of the bee's head, you can also see 3 small simple eyes, and these are called ocelli. They detect light intensity and movement. This one particularly is a tropical bee, and it is active in the night. So because of that, it has very large ocelli. Species have diverse tongue lengths that are generally categorized into short and long. The long tongue of this bumblebee allows it to reach the nectar inside deep flowers. Most bees with short tongues could not reach the nectar in a deep flower. So this is an example of a Nebraska native bee with a short tongue that can only reach the nectar of shallow flowers. We will now explore some bees that can be found here in the state. So bees in the genus Hylaeus are commonly called yellow-faced bees, and you cannot see it in this photo, but most of the face is yellow. The amount of yellow can help you identify the sex of the bee, and it can also help you identify the species. This genus is commonly seen in urban environments because it can meet its needs here. They are polylactic species, meaning they consume pollen from many different species of plants. And they also use stems of many different plants. They can even use stems from Phragmites, which is an invasive plant that is often seen in human-dominated areas. And you may be wondering where the scopa is on this bee. It does not carry pollen outside with a pollen brush, with that scopa, or with a basket, but instead it transports the pollen and nectar internally with a crop structure. And like a bird with a crop, the food is then regurgitated for the offspring. The eastern carpenter bee is the largest bee documented in Nebraska. This species has been observed as far west in the state as Hayes, and it is frequently observed in the east, with many iNaturalist observations in Omaha. It's easy to confuse a carpenter bee with a bumblebee since they are similar in size, but carpenter bees, they have a shiny abdomen instead of a fuzzy one like bumblebees. And unlike bumblebees, they are not social. They do live in shared housing a lot of the time. They often live in small groups, but they do not have that rigid social structure like honeybee communities do. And these carpenter bees can switch roles. These bees specifically, but there are also other bees that can do this as well. They steal nectar, so they sometimes cheat flowers by cutting into the side of the blooms to reach the nectar without pollinating the flower, and so this is called nectar robbing. They drill their nests, carving tunnels into wood, bamboo, and even buildings. If carpenter bees are being pests in your home structure, there are many pesticide-free ways to deter them from continuing to nest in your home. You can search IPM to manage carpenter bees to check out university extension pages to learn some of those techniques to deter nesting. And I do want to highlight that nests are often reused, so it is very important that you learn how to deter carpenter bees from nesting in those areas again. Based on our known diversity of the bees that occur here in Nebraska, it seems that the all-pair Perdita would be the smallest bee species that occurs here in Nebraska. So as a species, they exhibit narrow oligolecti. So this is on the opposite end of the lecti spectrum, and we talked about polylecti earlier, which is consuming pollen from many plants. So narrow oligolecti, this means that they only consume pollen from one plant genus. So for this all-pale Perdita, that genus is Dahlia species, and Dahlia species are commonly known as prairie clovers. Here in Nebraska, Chris Helzer, he is the Director of Science and Stewardship with the Nature Conservancy, but he has amazing pictures of the species. I don't think this one is one of them, but he does have some amazing pictures of the species, and he has stated that he has only seen this species on silky prairie clover. So if you're interested in seeing this species, you should go out and look for some silky prairie clover. And with their light color and their very small size, this bee has great camouflage and it can be very difficult to see. So that makes it hard if you're going out to search for it. And this species has been observed in north central Nebraska. Perditas in general, the whole genus, nest or burrows in the ground. Unlike many of the other ground nesting species that line their cell walls with layers of various substances to waterproof them, Perdita instead layer the food and the egg with a substance to waterproof them, if that makes sense. And then a morphological trait that is unique to Perdita species is that they have zigzag or spiral scopal hair. So the hair on their pollen brush is zigzag or spiraled. And then this bee is an agapostemon bee. When I make observations in gardens here in Nebraska, the bicolored sweat bee is one of the bright bees that I more frequently see. So keep an eye out for this species the next time you're out in a garden. And the black and yellow seen on the abdomen of the species is a way that you can distinguish the males from the females. So this one would be a male with a black and yellow, and then the females would be all green. This is a cuckoo bee that has been observed here in Nebraska. I have only ever observed cuckoo bees in pristine prairie habitats like 9 Mile Prairie. These bees require healthy host populations. So cuckoo bees are sneaky bees that don't build their own nests, and instead they lay their eggs in the nests of other bees, kind of like how cuckoo birds lay their eggs on other birds' nests. So when the cuckoo bee egg hatches, the baby bee often eats the food that was meant for the host bee's baby, or even the host baby itself. A cuckoo bee does none of the hard work of building a nest or collecting pollen and relies on other bees to raise their young. Here in Nebraska, you can also find nocturnal bees, which is super awesome. One of my colleagues collected one when we set up light traps last summer at Cedar Point Biological Center in Ogallala, and it does seem that this species particularly is seen more in the western part of the state. And then this species is in the halictid family, which is the same family that the earlier nocturnal species was from. And it also has those huge ocelli to help it detect movement and light in the darkness of the night. This leafcutter bee has extremely long mandibles, and mandibles are basically the teeth of insects. The species has not been documented in the state very often. There are only 3 known observations of this species here in Nebraska. I am very lucky that I got to work with a colleague, Cheyenne Lindsay. She's an amazing bee researcher. And she collected one of the observed individuals at a restored tallgrass prairie site. Like the small perdita bee that we talked about earlier, this is a specialist bee as well. It's an oligiolectic bee. The broad-footed cellophane bee species specializes on ground cherries. I find the species interesting because they use a cellophane-like substance to line their nests. Those waterproofing materials that we were talking about earlier. This species uses something similar to cellophane. And this longhorn bee is also a specialist on thistle species. also a specialist bee, but this one specializes on thistle species. And you can see this one mid to late summer. And like many of the other bees, this species nests below ground. So this species, it is kind of hard to see on the screen, but the stripes in the abdomen, they are called band of pearl stripes. Well, the coloring is, now I'm not sure what I'm talking about, but the coloring is kind of like a pearl, and it will reflect different colors at different angles of light, but it's just super awesome and very cool to see in person. And so this species is scarce. They inhabit prairie habitats, and much of the prairie habitat in Nebraska has been converted. For example, only 2% of the tallgrass prairie that once existed in the state remains today. These ground nesting bees also have a preference for sandy, alkaline soils, making it even more difficult for populations to disperse and establish. So now we're going to learn about the bee life cycle, and this will help us understand their needs and how we can support them. So over 90% of our native bees are solitary. This is an example of what a solitary life cycle can look like. Most of our solitary native bees generally live for about 1 year. The adult stage typically lasts 3 to 4 weeks, and the offspring typically remain in the nest for about 11 months, growing through the egg, larva, and pupa stage. The female will mate once and then spend her time creating and provisioning a nest to lay her eggs. A nest may have 1 to 10 cells depending on the species, and the cells may be formed or lined with waxy or cellophane-like secretions, as I mentioned earlier. They can also be lined with pieces of leaves or petals for leaf-cutting bees. They can be lined with soil or chewed up wood and many other materials. So this species shown particularly mixes together nectar and pollen to form a loaf that I and other bee scientists like to call bee bread. And they place that bee bread inside the brood cell. So after that, the adult bee will then lay eggs into the cell, usually on the loaf, and then they will seal that cell up. So once she has completed and sealed all of the cells in her nest, the bee will cap the nest entrance and leave. A female solitary bee may lay up to 20 to 30 eggs in her life. Eggs resemble a tiny white sausage, as you can see on this image here. And 1 to 3 weeks later, the eggs hatch, and a soft-bodied grub-like larva emerges. Feeding on bee bread, the larva grows rapidly for 6 to 8 weeks before changing into a pupa, and during the dormant pupal stage, which is 8 to 9 months, the bee transforms within a protective cocoon, into its adult form. So it is like the butterfly, where it has those forms in its life cycle that look very different. And when it emerges, the adult bee is fully grown, ready to mate, and continue the cycle all over again. So some of the needs that we can pick up from here, specifically, we're going to be focusing on those nesting materials. So roughly 70% of native bee species nest underground. These nests can resemble ant nests above ground. So a lot of people may think that they have a ant infestation, when really they have a lot of helpful bees. Ants are also helpful, but yeah. And then these nests can be found in turf, but more often on bare, exposed ground. They can occur in sandy to loam soils, and those are what are preferred, but some bees will also nest in clay. And nests can generally be observed on south-facing slopes. So you can promote ground nesting sites by leaving areas undisturbed with patches of bare soil. About 30% of our native bees nest as solitary individuals in wood tunnels, usually hollow stems or abandoned beetle borers holes found in dead trees or stumps. So, and this is what is seen in the image, and you can see the individual cells where the bee is developing. And it's not just the space for the bees to nest, but we also need to make sure that the bees have the different materials that are needed for all the species that exist. Um, so obviously help, we can't support every single species that exists, but the more diversity in the life that you provide in your habitat, you're going to target more different bees. So yeah, just make sure you're providing a lot of different materials for these bees to construct their brood cells. I am not going to go too far deep into the bumblebee life cycle, but here it is quickly, and then we'll highlight some of the needs that come out of this life cycle. So something that's different about honeybees and bumblebees is that bumblebees form annual colonies and honeybees form perennial colonies. So kind of like the plants, the bumblebees, their colony will only last for 1 year, whereas honeybee colonies can last longer. Bumblebees need a cavity in which to build their nest, so the queens are opportunist. They look for any suitable sized cavity. So sometimes this is above ground and sometimes it's below ground. It can happen in hollow trees, in abandoned bird nests, in rock walls, or under a tussock of grass, but they are mostly underground. They frequently happen in abandoned rodent holes, and this space is chosen because it is warm and already lined with fur. Um, Bumblebees and all native bees in general need blooming plants throughout the season. And you want to use native plants when possible because that is what the bee species that exist here have evolved with. So that's what they're used to. Unfortunately, I do have to highlight the ways that we harm bees. We cannot decrease threats if we do not know what they are. So habitat loss is a key driver of pollinator declines, and it can take several forms. So new land development, creating new communities is obviously one of the one of the main ways that we think about that, but it can happen in many other ways. Another part of pesticide contamination of areas that could otherwise be pollinator habitat. And pesticide contamination can destroy those areas that could otherwise be pollinator habitat. So that is a form of habitat loss. And then a third way that this can happen is the decline of a key plant species. For example, monarchs, they require milkweeds as host species, or the longhorn bee that we were talking about earlier that requires thistles. So if those species do not exist in an area where the bee exists, especially if that is within its natural range, then that is habitat loss. These are examples of common urban areas where pollinator habitat is lost, and this may be overlooked as habitat loss. And this can often be overlooked, especially in our urban environments, because we think we're providing grass, we're providing life. And sure, it is definitely better than concrete, but this does not really support that much life, especially when we're applying pesticides to keep our grass as green as this. So pesticide is an umbrella term including insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides, as well as rodent rodenticides, and even antimicrobial products. The term is often misused as synonym, synonymous with insecticides, but it is a much broader term. The pesticides we are concerned about for pollinators are insecticides, fungicides, which target fungi, and herbicides, which targets plants. And insecticides, they target insects. And pesticides are a major threat for bees and for all pollinators and for all insects. This photo shows sample jars with dead bees. During Pollinator Week in 2013, near Portland, Oregon, there was an accident, and some trees were treated with insecticides in a parking lot to control aphids. The pesticides got through the sap and into the flowers, killing approximately 50,000 bumblebees over the period of 2 weeks. So these samples showed that it was the pesticide that did that. The pesticides were applied legally, so no one was at fault. And so this really highlights that pesticides should be avoided, because even with our understanding today and the policy that we have around them, they can still cause this horrible, horrible things like this to happen. And good news coming out of this, though, is that those pesticides can no longer be used on linden trees in that city, in Portland. And when we think about pesticides, we often think about agricultural areas, but they are commonly used in urban areas as well, especially in our communities, in these beautiful gardens like this. Pesticides are often used for cosmetic reasons to maintain manicured landscapes. Pesticides eliminate cosmetic issues. And of course, we cannot go without addressing climate change. And now we've learned about the bees that we can find. We've learned about what they need and what the threats that they face. So now it's a good time to learn the good news about how you can help. So providing habitat makes a huge difference for pollinators. On a larger scale, our landscapes can become more resilient as well. And providing habitats can help connect natural habitats and act as a bridge for bees that have larger flight ranges to travel to those natural habitats. Natural habitats, natural areas like the few prairie reserves remaining here in Nebraska are the best habitat for native bees. Natural areas act as the glue that holds all other habitat together. However, we can provide for bees in our unnatural areas as well. There have been many studies that show how properly managed roadsides, eco roofs, bioswales, schools, parks, power lines, passes, dead trees, snags, and gardens can support bees. Bees don't need large areas of habitat. Even one plant can provide habitat. They also don't need nesting and foraging areas to be right next to each other. Think about what your neighbors have in their yard. The dotted line on this image shows you where a bee might travel and how the bee can get those different requirements across your entire neighborhood. Nest sites, bare ground, hollow tunnels, dead trees, you want to keep these features in the landscape if you can. It doesn't have to be tidy. And then for ground nest sites, these areas don't need to be too large. This picture shows an area of about 8 to 10 inches wide between a rocky wall and a driveway. There are holes under the rocks to the nest, and this is a great habitat in a small area. Easy to provide anything with a tunnel hole. Drill holes in the block or use bamboo. The larger the hole, the deeper they need to be. Remember, a series of brood cells. The last cells are males. but it is only the cells in the back that are females. The shorter the hole, the fewer females, and we want a lot of females. Mason bees will have mud at the end of the tunnel. Leafcutter bees will have leaves, and you can even find grass wasps in these nest blocks. So the stuffing that's inside the hole can help you learn about the species that exist in the area where that nest block is, which is something that's pretty exciting. As you can see, I talked a little too early about the grass. And those grass wasps are super awesome because they help with pest control in your yard. So something else that you could do is provide a bumblebee nest. So this is a nice project, but it does not have that much value because bumblebees generally prefer natural. So they're going to nest in the rodent hole or different things like that. But it is a good project to learn. Um, and you might be lucky and have a bumblebee. So yeah, that's a bumblebee nest that you can create. And one big mission that you can do in the fall that we host is to leave the leaves. While a couple of inches or more could smother the turf, research has shown that a thin layer of leaves is actually beneficial to lawns. And this is because decomposing leaves provide organic matter, and this organic matter provides nutrients to help the lawn grow. And so similarly, if you're growing plants, it's going to provide organic matter and nutrients for your plants as well, for your vegetables, for your crops. And if you do decide to remove some of the leaves in the spring, make sure that you wait until late in the season to increase the chance of successful emergence by butterflies, queen bumblebees, and other overwintering animals that utilize that space. So another thing that you can do at home similarly is to save the stems. So instead of pulling out your plants at the end of the season, you can leave them there and cut them at various heights. And many different insect species will use these. You can also build a stick pile, and this is going to be for those similar reasons. A lot of very beneficial organisms are going to be able to use that space as a home. And so this is another way to address some of those needs. And we have to use all of these various resources because of all of the bee diversity that exists. So you want to include a diversity of rock types and sizes. And a lot of bees will nest in the cracks, so you can leave space. And this can be a part of your hardscaping to help you keep control of your plants. Wouldn't it be nice if gardening were easier and took less work? A lot of what I promote about is making gardens less manicured, less tidy, and more wild. Reducing the intensity of maintenance, using fewer resources, including water, pesticides, and bark chips. And these things can bring big changes. So, no mow is another one of these methods that you can use. And if you are working on, say, no mow May, or if you're working on a prairie habitat, or something that is not as attractive to the eye that might make HOA unhappy, you can always put up a sign to help people understand what you're trying to do. And then unmowed lawns are better for bees, but they aren't the best thing that you can do. It's definitely a start. But we don't want this to be the end of what you do for insects. So that's why we like to educate you about all the other things that you can provide as well. So for the diversity of different bees with different emergence times and different flight periods, you would want to provide many different bee species, many different plant species that bloom throughout the entire summer, throughout the fall, anytime that these bees are active. And so social bees like honeybees and bumblebees, because they are active for a longer period, they are going to need more consistent food sources, and they're going to need more food sources in general. So having something in bloom consistently is important. And like I stated earlier, locally sourced native plants are always better because the insects that are in our environment likely evolved with those plants. So bees don't see red, white, yellow, or purple. Bees don't see red, but white, yellow, and purple are great. They see ultraviolet, and green is the same as red to them. So a diversity of flowers is good for that reason. Some bees have different frequencies that they can see, so you want to plant different colors to ensure that different bees can see them. 3 species of flowers should be blooming at all times from late winter to late fall. Native plants have shown to support a greater diversity and abundance of native bees. With climate change, we definitely want to think about drought-tolerant plants. And for all of these reasons, native plants are best. It is important that the pollinator habitat contains a diversity of native plants to provide a succession of bloom throughout the growing season. So when you're buying garden plants, and if you're selecting ornamentals, you want to make sure that you're getting plants that are as close to our native species as possible. So you could get purple coneflower or Spanish lavender. And so some of our cultivars, um, they are not the best for bees because of ways that humans have modified them. And we have modified them in so many different ways. But when the color is modified, it can change how a bee observes that flower. And for so many reasons. So you want to make sure that you're avoiding cultivars when possible. And this is similar to No Mow May. Um, An eco lawn can just be a lawn that you apply benign neglect to. If you're letting more weeds grow and more species grow in that area. Pesticides are a huge issue, and there are webinars and a lot of resources on the Xerces website to learn more about pesticides. And so because of this, when you go to a nursery, especially with GMO crops, you want to be able to make sure to ask if the plant has been treated, and if it has neonicotinoid neonics in the plant. And if you don't, if the nursery that you go to says that they don't know, you should probably not source from them because they might not want to share that they use those pesticides. And a diversity of plants in untidy areas in your yard will bring beneficial insects. So these beneficial insects can be used instead of many pesticides. So there are so many campaigns that we have at Xerces that you can be a part of. Bring back the pollinators. That is the main part of this presentation today that I shared with you. But there are also signs that can be purchased through our gift catalog. And like we talked about earlier, we showed with the No Mow May one, You can use that one, or you can even create your own sign if you want to highlight some species that are existing in your habitat. In addition to this, we do have a few bee cities that are designated here in Nebraska. For example, Bellevue up in Omaha, that is a bee city. So if you're somewhere else in Nebraska and you want to help your community better understand bees and better protect and support bees and other pollinators, then you can visit our website to learn more about Bee City. And we also work to teach multiple ages. So we have this amazing X Kids program for kids, and we target grades 3 to 5 with that. And community science, there are so many ways that you can get involved with that. We have the Bumblebee Atlas, and we do have one here in Nebraska that is managed by our the Xerces employee, Katie Lemke. So if you want to go out and help observe these bees, especially bumblebees, and be a part of the research that we do, that's one way that you can join. And we also have books. So if you donate some money, you can get a membership and you can also get a gift. So those books can be one of those gifts. But you can also purchase our books on Amazon or different websites like that. And we have so many resources on so many different insect topics. So please check out our website if you are interested in learning about anything specific. We have a lot of IPM resources that could be super helpful for managing pests. And I love the Bug Banter podcast. Rachel, she is the person that helps manage the ambassadors, the volunteers like me, but she is one of the people that hosts the podcast. And her and the other hosts, they have amazing questions. And they bring on all of these amazing scientists that are specialized on different insects and topics. So that's a great place to learn. And you can also learn from us on YouTube, and many of our other social media handles. So thank you for joining the presentation today. And then I am just going to leave this up, but feel free to ask questions. But yeah, as Laura stated earlier, there is a workshop starting at 6:30, so you may want to jump onto that.
Thank you, April, for your presentation. That was awesome and very interesting to learn about the variety of bees and the importance of protecting them. I launched the survey, and I'd appreciate the survey being filled out. We have a question in the Q&A. Can you see the question, April?
Is there things... Okay, let me read the question 1 second. So Xerces Society does not have the same leaves sign that we have in that picture. We should have that picture on our website, and you might be able to Google image reverse and see if you can find that sign like that. But as I stated, you can create your own sign. So if you want to take a picture of leaves and make one similar, you can do that. I'm sorry that you... Oh, yes, I will pull up the slide again. Let me see. Okay, there it is. So this one is actually it is just from our social media. So it's just a picture of leaves, and then we have that written on the background. So yeah, you can probably, even if you take a screenshot of this, take that screenshot and print it.
I think there was like a sign, a similar sign on another slide as well.
We do have some more slides. So we have one slide. So this one is not ours. But it does look like it was created by one of the Bee City USA communities. And so there's that one, and there is the one that talks about pollinator habitat. So this is one that we do have. Is it legal to add the info on the side? I do believe it is legal because that is basically it comes from a lot of research and it's a lot of stuff coming together. So it's not Xerces copyrighted or anything. You're welcome. If you are close to Bellevue or one of the other Bee cities here in Nebraska, I only know of Bellevue. I feel like there's another one, but I can't remember. But if you're close to Bellevue, maybe you can collaborate with some of the people that are on the Bee City team and create one for all of us here in Nebraska. Because that could be something that the Bee City team they could use those signs and sell them to raise funds.
Thank you, April, and thank you everyone for attending. And everyone have a good evening. And if you need any more information about tonight's presentation or questions in general, you can email anyconserve@info.org, I think. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
and
you, guys.
whoever's going to the next webinar, enjoy the webinar.